The Bob Murphy Show, episode 393.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews, conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bob Murphy Show. We got another crossover. These just keep getting spicier and spicier. Adam and I talk about the basic issue is what's the proper response when there's a growing trend of people talking about things that you dislike and think are very injurious to civil society. What do you do about it? Do you just shout down the people talking about that stuff, even if some of them are asking questions in good faith? Or do you engage, and does that platform or legitimize the issues and so forth? So that's what we're talking about. It's pretty self-explanatory, so why don't we just go ahead and jump right in? But I think it is a very fruitful discussion, and the time's going to go by very quickly, I think you'll find. Here we go.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Adam.
Nice to talk to you again. This week, I think you and I are going to discuss the pernicious dangers of shutting down discussion on certain topics. I think there's a million examples of this, and we'll get into all of them, but there's one that you
know what? I'm going to be contrarian, or I don't know what, Aryan. Ooh, see what I did there? That was a Freudian slip, was it not?
That's foreshadowing. A little foreshadowing.
And say, I don't even want to load the deck. I want to not tell our audience, don't you ever dare do this or you're bad. Don't shut down. Maybe sometimes you should shut down debate, right? So let's even leave that open. That's
a good point. We're just talking about the issue and whether it's good or bad or tactical in certain situations.
Weirdly, by me saying let's not shut down discussion, I ended up calling myself an Aryan. And for folks at home, it's because I was taking the contra off contrarian. That's what happened there. Really, it was. Okay.
Yeah, there are no such thing as misspoken words. So, along with this meta topic, I think, Bob, you wanted to start with the controversy surrounding Daryl Cooper of the Martyr Made podcast on Joe Rogan recently.
Sure. And folks, it's funny because right before we started recording, Adam and I were just talking about so we didn't get tripping over each other, who's doing what. And he said, oh yeah, I'll just set it up. Then I'll let you talk about Daryl, and then, we'll play the clip. And I said, yeah, I'll be real fast. And he said, I don't believe you. And I realized you're right. I'm not going to be fast because there's some things I want to say. So the
floor is yours. The floor is yours.
So briefly, folks, as briefly as can be done and still get the points across. Daryl Cooper was recently on Joe Rogan, and Daryl Cooper, Adam and I have talked about him. He was on Tucker Carlson, 6 months ago or something at this point, caused a firestorm, was actually, I think, addressed by the White House. Well, no, I'm getting mixed up, but certainly major historians coming on and denouncing him and everything, and for suggesting that that Churchill may have been the chief villain of World War II. So that's the guy we're talking about. He ended up on Rogan recently, and people just lost their minds. And it was a similar kind of pattern that kind of sets the stage for what we're going to talk about tonight, that clips were going viral where everyone was like, look at what this guy said. And I'd watch it and say, what are you guys seeing? I can't even, and partly I think it's because I have consumed dozens of hours worth of Daryl Cooper's podcast and seen him in various places. So when he says something, I know the context, I know what he's trying to get across. Whereas other people just seeing, a 2-minute clip might walk away thinking something. And so part of what's going on, there were a few cases in the Rogan episode, not what Adam and I are going to talk about right now, but just more generally, where I could understand if you have been primed to think this guy is a neo-Nazi and he's doing everything in his power to resurrect the cult of Adolf Hitler and to finish his good work here on earth. But he realizes for political various reasons, he's got to be a little bit cagey about it. I can understand where there are a few things where you could have thought he was saying something more and even there is where, just so people understand what I'm talking about, things like at one point he said something like, oh yeah, like, in biology, there's this phenomenon where if like the mother of a, cubs or something, the more that she has this certain hormone or something that increases her protectiveness of her cubs, that also tends to make her more violent when attacking, outgroup members. And then he said, 2 sentences later, and nobody would deny that Adolf Hitler really loved the German people. Okay. Now that's kind of where he stopped it, but I can understand how, if you've been taught by, all these other media figures that you've trusted, for your political analysis, and who aren't typically woke, right? Like, people who are very big on, oh, hey, just because someone challenges affirmative action doesn't mean they're racist. Or, what I mean? So you think, oh no, these people, they're reasonable. And if they're telling me this Daryl Cooper guy, loves Hitler, okay, then you would hear that and say, oh yeah, he is apologizing, but he's trying to let us know, so there was that stuff. And then there was another one where he was explaining how Hitler, when he was younger, actually didn't interact with Jewish people much, and just growing up. And then later he was thrust into poor areas of Germany, working class, rubbing shoulders, and it wasn't very pleasant, the conditions that the Germans were living in. And that Daryl Cooper's theory was the way Adolf Hitler reconciled, his love of the German people and thinking Germany's so strong and intelligent and moral people, and then looking at, the slums in which he was living and how the people conduct themselves, he blamed the Jews. Like, oh, they have been, tricked by the Jewish elites into living like this or whatever. And so, Cooper said something, I forget his exact quote, but something along the lines of Hitler's anti-Semitism was the vehicle by which he could maintain his love for the German people or something like that. So I can understand how people would think, oh, he's trying to come up with rationalist explanation besides just he was a demon sent by the devil himself, to do awful things. And that's the only, and anything short of that to try to psychoanalyze and to give an explanation or to say, there's one other story where, Cooper told this funny thing about, I won't spoil it, but it's a funny story from his personal life about he ended up in a situation and it involved not getting to the bathroom in time, and hilarity ensued, put it that way. And he was likening that, hey, sometimes history is just like that, where, you say, how did I find myself in this situation? And so I was trolling a little bit and posted that. And then some guy said to me, yeah. And then, he kind of linked that to how, you just kind of fall into genocide, it's kind of crazy. Right. So I get, those things. But again, even here, I'm grasping at straws almost. I'm saying if I bend over backwards and I watch the entire 2.5 hour or whatever it was Rogan interview, there were a few points where I thought, okay, yeah, I could see how if you just listened to that and you already thought for other reasons, this guy's a monster, you might, but technically he didn't say anything monstrous, right? And then if you have the whole body of his work. So anyways, there is that element. I just wanted to say that as a disclaimer, but what the clip that I grabbed and the thought you and I should discuss has to do with the issue of Cooper, I think, made a very interesting claim saying this attempt to clamp down and shout down and demonize anybody who challenges the conventional narrative. Not only is it wrong in terms of like, you shouldn't treat people like that, it's, smearing their reputation and whatever unfairly, but also it has the exact opposite effect of what you think you're doing is preventing the next Holocaust.
Yeah, I think I understood Daryl Cooper's point on Joe Rogan. I mean, you miss breakfast one morning and have too many cups of coffee, and then one thing leads to another, and you're invading Poland and building death camps. Yeah. I got it. All right. Well, if you're ready, let's play the clip.
That overreaction is really counterproductive too.
Yeah.
And because to go back to what I said a second ago, like understanding brings you right up to the brink of empathy. That, more understanding to these issues. And I've found this 100 times, because like, look, anti-Semitism is a weird thing, and we can talk about some of the history of that if you want, but it's this thing that people get obsessed with, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like part of their ideology. I've watched this happen to like good, clear thinking, regular people. They start listening to a few podcasts that, they can't repost under their real name on Twitter because they're funny or interesting. And then pretty soon you can't bring that dude to a party anymore because he just can't go 10 minutes without in neutral company, like bringing up the Jews. And it's like that happens. You see that happen. I mean, the so what you see on social media a lot. I mean, it's like there's no doubt there's been like a big explosion of that kind of rhetoric,
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is online trolling, and it's the fact that people are so sensitive about it that like it's just the easiest way to get a huge reaction, from people. And I think a lot of it has to do with that, but I think a lot of it also has to do with the fact that so many of these questions have really been made. It's not like they're off limits, like they're illegal and you're going to go to jail if you talk about them. I'm still sitting here. I mean, I'm on your podcast, and so it's a big platform to talk about these things. It's not like that. But the attempt is to make it so that you can't be in any kind of respectable society.
Yeah, the attempt is to make you radioactive.
Yeah, and that, again, I think is just completely counterproductive because, people look at something. I think Theo was talking about this in one of his recent interviews. He was saying, somebody sees what's happening in Gaza right now, and they just see kids getting pulled out of rubble, and it's shocking and horrifying. And they see that, and they find out that the U.S. is sending money and weapons. And they're like, well, why is that happening? And they start looking into it, and they go to the websites that are going to tell them the truth about it. And pretty soon, one link leads to another. And when they go ask one of their history professors at school or something, like, hey, Uncle Adolf 1488 in the comments section, like, told me XYZ, like, that you go and ask about it, he gets like shouted down and attacked for like asking the question. And then, what, that doesn't have the effect of him saying, wow, like, I guess that really is terrible and I should never ask that again. They think, that's weird. Like, why are people responding this way? I was asking that question in good faith, And so it really has like the opposite effect of the one that is at least ostensibly intended,
So there you have it, folks.
Yeah. So again, what I was hoping, and I'm not saying this to be dramatic or something, or just to play it up for the pocket, but I really thought, that's something I want to talk to Adam about, like, because this is interesting just to go through, because I think there's a few layers there. But what occurred to me when I was reviewing the timestamps to tell you, hey, let's play a clip, another one jumped out at me there where I could see how the respectable people who think Daryl Cooper is like, I don't know if I trust this guy. Even his stuff in the beginning there, I think I could see some people having the reaction of, no, Daryl, it's not like a bunch of my friends all of a sudden I can't take them to parties anymore because they can't stop talking about the Jews in front of neutral company. Like, what does that mean? You mean people like who don't get it, like we do, And so I could see how people looking at that would, whereas to me, it's just, I just know how he talks, and I guess, I like to grab information from people, and I learn stuff from his pocket over here, and that doesn't bother me. But I guess I could see some people hearing that and being like, what the heck is up with this guy? How many friends do you have that went full, went Nazi on you? That seems weird.
Yeah, I have two quick thoughts. The first is I went looking to see if Uncle Adolf 1488 was available, and it just wasn't. That's a funny screen name. And the second is, first of all, if you haven't consumed 30 hours of Martyr Made podcast, it is easy to misconstrue, if you're just getting a clip, especially when our species is capable of literally seeing what they want to see. That phrase, two movies on one screen, that Scott Adams, I think, popularized when talking about the Trump phenomenon, where people will see Trump say it's a nice day today, and half the country thinks, yeah, I guess it is a nice day, and the other half will find a way to think he's a Nazi.
You mean to lynch someone? It's a nice day to lynch someone?
Exactly.
Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Also, it rained over here on this corner of the of the globe. Does he hate these people and never want them to be dry? So if you have an ideological presupposition to think badly of somebody, and that somebody is talking about things that are complicated and that you don't know that much about yourself, I'm sure it's very easy to mishear and missee what this guy's talking about and think he's a demon. I'm not surprised by that at all. I'm horrified, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So, as far as the substantive point he was trying to make there, I'm just curious if we can unpack that a little bit. So I prima facie, what he's saying, I think there's a certain logic to that for sure, that if the reason that we could give as to why is it that if somebody asks what could be an innocent question and we just shout them down and and we try to like nip it in the bud. When, hey, I'm just asking questions. And, it's like right now, if somebody just openly said, I don't think the Holocaust happened or whatever, like he wouldn't go to jail in the United States. And I think in Germany you would, and some other, Austrian stuff, I think you actually would go to jail for saying stuff like that. But here it's just, your normal career would be ruined, or unless maybe you're Kanye West or something. But, it's most people would not be able to get away with saying that. Certainly guys that look like you and me, put it that way, Adam. If they openly were literally denying the Holocaust, right? And so but then you kind of move the goalpost a little bit. And so like, what if someone's going around, like my joke at one point was to say, imagine some history, guy getting his PhD in history and goes into his advisor and he says, I've been crunching the numbers and I think the number's more like 3 million that died. I'm pretty sure his advisor's like, yeah, I think you should pick a different topic. Like there's just, you know what I mean? And the guy could be like, no, what? Just isn't accuracy? And he's like, trust me, you do not want that to be your dissertation, right? And I just, I think that kind of, right? And so if somebody, a physicist came in and said, yeah, I think we're wrong on the charge of an electron, I think it's actually, 16 percentage points low, that would be fine, right? But you can understand the sense in which somebody would say, what's the point of you doing that research, right? Whereas in most areas, you wouldn't think to say, what's the point of you doing that? They would be like, well, it's just, because we're at PhDs and what the heck else are we going to do? There's so many of us, we got to do something, right? But on that narrow question, you could say, why do you want to make that point? And so...
And it's not crazy because, if the charge of the electron is a different number, we're not going to go round people up over it.
Right.
And I think Daryl is making a brilliant point. If you try and obfuscate or hide or shout down these earnest and honest questions from people who are young and, they don't understand why this is such a hot button topic. If you try and shout them down, it's not going to work. It's going to be counterproductive. And the instinct to nip it in the bud is completely correct. But the problem is most people, probably even most history professors, aren't really intellectually armed enough to actually nip it in the bud, with nothing but a charming presentation of facts and logic. And failing that, you get into this knee-jerk thing that any parent of a 6-year-old probably understands. It's because I told you, that's why, quit asking questions. Because they don't want this person going down that rabbit hole and ending up like some kind of neo-Nazi, and they don't have they can't prove the 6 million number versus the 3 million or whatever. And so they just fear. It's fear that makes people shut down discussion. And I think it's counterproductive. And I mean, to give the devil his due, I don't know a better way, really. I mean, what are you going to do if you're that history professor and you can't really discuss, answer the questions that this kid has for you? What do you do? What would you do?
Well, I mean, I'm not a historian, but what I would say, so this, to make an analogy here, when I was a professor at Hillsdale, I got into the intelligent design debate, right? Mostly as a spectator, like writing stuff for LouRockwell.com or whatever. Obviously, I wasn't out conducting biology experiments. And one of the talking points in that debate, as it was flaring up at that point, and various schools were trying to say, hey, well, maybe we should teach the controversy. And a lot of the, standard rank and file biologists were, no, you're not going to, you don't do that or whatever. And they were just saying, like, that's unacceptable. That's science. We've known this for a century or whatever, decades, blah, blah, blah. And my response as an economist was like, what are you talking about? I just spent 3 weeks talking about free trade and why tariffs are a bad idea. We've known that since 1776. But you know what? A lot of average Americans are swayed by protectionist rhetoric. So my job as an economist is to go in and tackle that head on and not just tell them, well, if you want to pass my class, you better write on a piece of paper on the test that no, tariffs are bad. Or, you know what I'm saying? So that was my response to them, that, yeah, I suppose if it really is some very minority, 0.1% of the population believes something, so let's just pretend it doesn't exist. And the way we handle it is if somebody says something in the same zip code as that, we just let them know you no longer have any friends in this town and you can't get a job. That might work to contain something that only appeals to 0.1. But if it's at the point where it's already broken out, then yeah, you got to deal with it head on. And I think too, there's this thing where for a lot of these issues, it's more of a spectrum. And a Daryl Cooper is what he is, but he's not the same guy that, because you see this on Twitter too. Like these people aren't the people who are lamenting the rise of anti-Semitism, especially since October 7th, they're not inventing stuff. I mean, there are any given thread now. If somebody comes in and posts something, like some guy challenges Daryl Cooper, there will be 15 guys in the comments saying, okay, Jew. Like that's their whole tweet. You know what I mean? And so I get why, so those people are obviously being counterproductive too. Whether I think Daryl's right that a lot of them is just they're trolls and they realize this is the way to anger people. You know what I mean? Just
Right.
like they could have done something else in a different context, but here they realize, oh, this is really the way to get people riled up is to say this. Whereas if you, call a woman the C word, that's not nearly doesn't get as much of a reaction now as doing this in the current moment. So there's all that. But my point is, I think some people believe, no, by treating that whole spectrum as one point, and that anybody who even says, maybe Hitler was partly doing this for strategic reasons. And notice when he gave a speech to inter-party members, he was more anti-Semitic than what he did. And that was one of the points Daryl Cooper made. And people, for one thing, I don't have a screenshot, but one guy, he put quotation, he said, Cooper, and put quotation marks and put in a string of words that did not come out of Daryl Cooper's mouth.
Right.
And then there were community notes correcting the misquote that was falsely attributed to Daryl Cooper. It's like, yeah, good job, guys, but that wasn't what he said. And the community note was consistent with what Daryl Cooper actually said on Rogan, right? So to go ballistic on someone making a true statement that I don't think was coming from a place of anti-Semitism and lumping him in with all the people that really are, just whether they're sincere or trolling, are, just outright saying, oh, if you're Jewish, I hate you, you killed Jesus. To me, that's counterproductive. It gives cover to the actual anti-Semite, just like a different phenomenon. I don't know if you noticed this, Adam, but years ago, when the left was real big on, everything was racist, everything was sexist or whatever. And then, I was at some libertarian events and there were guys telling genuinely offensive jokes, that would bother women in particular, right? Because again, back then it was like, 95% male, 5% women at these libertarian events kind of thing. And I knew there were some women hearing that it made them uncomfortable. And somebody, and the point was a lot of the guys, when they got some pushback, were like, what, I'm not violating the NAP, and this is, what are you, just, oh, are you politically correct? And it was the kind of thing where because the left had so overreacted, now when someone really was being a boor, then, you couldn't call them out on it because they could just play victim and be like, oh, here we go again, I'm controlling my speech. And was like, no, you're being an a-hole, So anyway, I think the same kind of thing is happening here where both sides are just feeding into this thing where there's legitimately anti-Semitic people coming and saying horrific things that, then make the other people feel justified in saying, no, this really is, crazy anti-Semitism just openly displayed on X. Elon's not policing it, so we got to take it into, we got to do it. And then they're doing things that then convince the anti-Zionists that, no, we're in the right. These guys are just a bunch of liars. Look at what they do.
Yeah, it's really pernicious. I mean, first of all, social media just adds a little sprinkle of crazy on every issue that you wouldn't have if the conversations were in person or whatever. But then again, it's pernicious. Like the guys who are truly racist say some things, and they can generate anti-Semitic thoughts and feelings in others. But then guys that come back and paint with too broad a brush or misquote Daryl Cooper in the way that they did, those guys are also going to make people pushed in the anti-Semitic direction because they know that they're being lied to by one side, and maybe they can't parse the arguments on the other side. Like if I were a truly vicious person, without even going and Googling Nick Fuentes, I could create an argument as to how Jews are a disproportionate threat in every country that they're in, to gather together the levers of power in government and finance. And I could create a huge, Rothschilds centered, argument as to why they're a horrible threat. And of course that argument is stupid and terrible, and a smart person could refute it. But it's dangerous to try and refute it with nonsense and with shouting down and incoherent hatred, because it's only going to make people who were on the fence or curious or young pushed away from the light and sensibility and towards the dark and racism and evil.
Yeah, because it's an implicit admission that,
yes.
Oh yeah, their point is correct.
Yes.
It's just very awkward for us. So that's why let's talk about, again, well, why are you even making that point? So what? That kind of a thing. you're a bad person for saying that, as opposed to, well, no, that's not right. So my favorite thing with a lot of times when people do that, like I'll say stuff and then they'll say, you know, Bob, aren't you overlooking which group is doing all these things? You know, like if I'm listing, you know, central banking, whatever, you know, social evils. And I'll say, you're right. It's the men. It's always the men.
It is always the men.
Because, you know, and so that's the way I handle it, to show them, you know, you think you're doing a slam dunk on me because, hey, isn't it kind of interesting that it's always this, you know, and it's like, well, no, the tighter correlation is it's always men doing these you know, these men, they start all the wars and they run all the banks. If you think about it, it's really, you know, and it's more men that, you know, and you can say, well, no, I mean, there's a few, you know, Margaret Thatcher's, right. And just like, you know, there's non-Jewish people who do these things that the anti-Semites blame on the Jews, right? So it's so
we even have a cute saying: the exception proves the rule.
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense, but it's convincing. I wonder if now's the time to trot out. You know, it's a perfectly natural, unfortunate phenomenon in the human psychology to just shut down opposing views when you're in power. You know, we just suffered a whole bunch of years of it. With the COVID narratives. And if you try to go on social media and say something against it, you got shut down. The same with quote unquote election deniers. And it's been with us forever. I mean, Eugene V. Debs is famous for getting votes running for president as a socialist, but the reason he was in jail is because he was handing out pamphlets saying we shouldn't get into the World War I. And that's how the government was handling the objection that maybe it's a bad idea to start this war. By the way, they were right. It was one of the worst things we've ever done. And I don't know if you have any genius thoughts about why this is such a common reflexive impulse, and whether you think there are ever instances where it's effective, or if it's always counterproductive.
This is going to sound like a very classic economist answer that yes, you know, to everything you just said, that for one thing, yeah, like I think it was Joe Sobran one time when you know, in one of his articles, he said something like, you know, people are trying to cite these studies or something saying the death penalty doesn't work, but then why does the mob use it? Something like, you know what I mean? And so I think that, you know, in general, to say, you know, if you're trying to get the public to go with you on something and then making it known, if you disagree with us on this, then you're going to go to jail. I think in the short run, that probably is effective. And that's why dictators and stuff, you know, use those techniques. Certainly there's a chilling effect. Certainly, you know, I think, and that's what Rogan was saying to Daryl Cooper, that, you know, they were letting it be known, like they were making an example of him. Or recently, I've been doing a lot of podcasts and interviews and stuff on Ross Ulbricht, and I think the same thing there too. Like, why did he get such a crazy sentence? It wasn't because they were just running the numbers and like, well, no, I mean, you know, you set up a website, then this happened. It's double life plus 40. That's what pops out of the machine. No, it was they were sending a message to people like, hey, this is a new technology where don't even think about doing this because look what happens, right? And so anyway, I think that, yes, there is that element, and we can't see, you know, how many people would have been handing out leaflets against U.S. entry in the First World War had they not locked him up. You know what I mean? All we see is what happened. We don't know, you know, the counterfactual of, oh yeah, maybe the U.S. wouldn't have been able to get into the war. I don't know the exact timeline or whatever, but it's possible that was one of the necessary ingredients to get the U.S. to go in there or something. I don't know, but you can make that argument. You're right. So in other words, I think the fact that governments lock up political opponents, you know, is consistent with that serving some short-term gain, but then also in the long run, yeah, you can't stamp out, you know, that's not the way to stamp out opposition in the long run. So I think both can be true. And again, though, just to, you know, circle back to the point that, like what I was saying with the tariffs or whatever, that it's easy just to like, and that's like the thing that a lot of my libertarian colleagues are saying, particularly ones that are associated with more Washington, D.C. based think tanks, with all this tariff stuff, you know, oh, they just don't even know Econ 101. It's like, well, for one thing, they have PhD economists who are advising the Trump team and coming out and saying stuff. So just saying that's not going to help, but also the genie's out of the bottle. You know, there's plenty of intellectual people who are at the point where they're saying, well, here's David Ricardo's argument for, you know, free trade and, you know, comparative advantage. And it made these assumptions, and they're not true in our world right now. It's this is it. So if all you do is say, yeah, but the textbook says comparative advantage, like the people who are inclined, labor union leaders are going to say, well, the fact that you're holding up a textbook and banging it over the table with it, that's not going to convince me. So, again, whatever the merits are, I think that it's not going to work. And particularly if you really can't be that draconian, right? So yeah, maybe the Taliban can stamp out drug use and sales and whatever, but in our society, no, drug prohibition doesn't work, partly because we're not literally going to chop people's heads off.
Yeah, that's right. And in your mafia example, in the short run it works, but in the long run, you have increased the probability, probably exponentially, that you yourself are going to get whacked someday.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that's true in the other examples too. And as you were talking, I was thinking that's sort of a perfect demonstration of high time preference versus low time preference. And we're always talking about, the more civilized and prosperous society is the one that has the low time preference. So maybe that's another indicator that that's the right way to go.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just shout people down. You have to actually explain what's wrong with their argument. And that's the only healthy way to nip these ideas in the bud.
And just generally, I think the reason people get so emotional about this is, and I can say this because I remember distinctly having this thought. I guess I was in high school, I think it was in high school, where I actually thought that, wow, World War II is such a clear-cut example. Are you ready for it, Adam? I thought of why, what did I call? I don't think I would have used the word pacifism. Maybe non-interventionism. Maybe I forget what word, but why non-interventionism doesn't work. Or the dangers of isolationism. That's probably the word I had in my head at the time. Right. At this point, this is like when I was into Rush Limbaugh and stuff. That was that
Sure.
phase of my life. National Review, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like libertarian on economic issues, but more conservative American right winger on foreign policy. Right. Like the first Gulf War, I was looking at photos of the Air Force jets and stuff and thinking they were awesome. Right. That's kind of who I was at that point in my life. So I'm just saying, I remember that I had thought, the lesson of World War II was they didn't stop Hitler in time. They just kept trying to delay. And then, the clear lesson was when there's a rising threat like that, you got to take that guy out fast because he's just only going to gain strength. So I understand the here, and like the slogan, never again. So
Yeah.
I get it that people right now, they see Daryl, they think, they're saying, oh, I learned the lessons of history. I'm not going to be one of those people that sat by and made excuses while Hitler kept growing and in strength. That, no, we're going to take these people. I understand that, but I don't think, this is the different reads of history and whatever. But to me, I don't think the problem was that, there were a few German people that could have spoken out against Hitler and then refrained from doing so. And then therefore the Holocaust happened. I think it was a lot more nuanced than that. And, one of Daryl Cooper's arguments is, had Winston Churchill behaved differently, the Holocaust would not have happened in
Sure.
the version we know.
Yeah.
Because the public lets their government get away with some horrific things when you think we're all going to die if we don't win this war. Just like the U.S. government rounded up all the Japanese people and put them in literal concentration camps. Would that have happened if Japan hadn't bombed Pearl Harbor? No. So again, it's not just well, hey, look what the Americans are capable of. Yeah, in certain circumstances. So,
yeah, a couple things. First of all, you shouldn't feel bad. I mean, I'm sure you don't, but for having those thoughts in your head, because we are programmable species. You're going to think what you're exposing yourself to. And if you're listening to Rush Limbaugh and reading National Review and probably every other paper, that's was available, those are the lessons you're going to learn. You need to be exposed to new ideas before you change your mind. And the second is, damn it, those airplanes are cool. And submarines are cool. And military tactics are cool. I mean, I study and train myself just for personal use. And it's a little war that goes on in my head. I really do respect combative technology and the martial arts. But on the other hand, I'm horrified by violence and fighting, and we misuse these tools. I'd like to see all these things used in perfect self-defense, and it just horrifies me that we use these things, and many of them are designed to project forward power. I mean, that's what an aircraft carrier is basically, right? And
I remember just on that point narrowly, I was reading some account of World War II, and it was like, oh, and when the theater opened up down in Africa or something, and there was so much land. It was like the tank battles were more like naval battles, and I was like, oh,
Right, in the deep jungle. All right, well, we've got a couple of other examples. One small and X-based, and the other monetary policy-based. Which one do you want to lead with?
Oh yeah, why don't we do the X-based one? You're talking about when I got blocked.
Yeah.
So it's Alex Noresta, Nowrasteh. I hear his name pronounced. I'm like, okay, I got it. I forget. So I'm not making fun of his name. I am going to make fun of his tweeting, but I'm not trying to make fun of his name. Just acknowledging I might be butchering it. So anyway, he and I have been, maybe mildly antagonistic over the last few years because he's very open borders, and I have been not open borders, right? I'm not necessarily closed borders, but I'm also, trying to like knock down some of the more, simplistic in my mind or crude, and especially like the holier than thou.
Yeah.
Like if you disagree with open borders, it's just because you're a racist, xenophobe. And,
right.
Come on. Or don't call yourself a libertarian, that kind of stuff. So anyway, he retweeted this thing. Some guy, some think tank released something assessing the podcasting space, and it has like these bubbles, presumably based on like how many listeners or downloads or something, and so the biggest one in the middle is Joe Rogan, and then Ben Shapiro's big, Charlie Kirk, I'm just looking at it now, Jordan Peterson, Candace Owens, Russell Brand, Tucker Carlson, Trevor Noah, the Young Turks, right? And going through and you can see them all. And so people were, the point of the group that did this study to assess these media trends and whatnot is they were a left-leaning group, and they were saying, hey, we've been advising, consulting with left-leaning organizations, Democratic Party and whatnot, saying you got to watch for this, that, the podcasting space is completely dominated by right-wing, hosts and viewpoints. And this isn't something you're going to get past just with an ad spend or something, next cycle. And so then Alex chimed in on this. So this thing was making the rounds, and he said, I don't see left versus right here. I see intelligent reporting and commentary versus idiotic, conspiratorial, lowbrow, Holocaust-denying, brain-damaged drivel.
So right? Persuasive.
Yeah, right. And so, wait, what are you trying to say, Alex? So I retweeted that, and I said something like, Alex should be relieved to learn that not a single podcast host, nor anyone that they had as a guest, denies the Holocaust. And yet, Alex prefers to live in a world where tens of millions of Americans don't think the Holocaust happened. Or I said something like that. And then in response to that, he makes what could be, career-destroying smears of people if, people took his word for it. Saying that if these people were what he said, that's a pretty damning accusation. Right? He's not saying, yeah, that guy's figure for GDP growth last quarter, I think, was off by 2 percentage points. That's not what he's saying here. He's saying these are awful, horrible people. You shouldn't listen to them. You should be ashamed of yourself if you like any of these people. And so then when I say that's not true, you would think his reaction would be, oh, on the contrary, Bob, here's 3 examples. But no, all he did was block me and then tweeted to somebody and said, yeah, Bob Murphy's been misrepresenting my statements, for a while now, and I don't want to keep giving him ammunition to misrepresent me. So, just the irony there and the, Orwellian just makes your head explode when he just completely lies about all these people. All I do is point out he's lying, and then he's, Bob's misrepresenting me. I don't, was he not trying to say they were denying the Holocaust when he said idiotic, conspiratorial, lowbrow, Holocaust denying, brain damage drivel? Maybe I was reading too much into that, but to me, it sounded like he was saying these people are pushing Holocaust denial. So anyway, so that's just a good example where, of course, if there is some nuance, and by the way, like in the comments, some people were pushing back. So one guy was like, well, yeah, Bob, they don't literally deny the Holocaust. All they do is make excuses and say it wasn't as bad as, people say. And I said, give me 2 examples.
Right.
And he said, well, Daryl Cooper, was just on Rogan. And so I said, I've listened to dozens of hours of Daryl. He didn't say the Holocaust wasn't bad. What are you talking about? And then he switched to, well, Candace Owens had some guy that I don't know on. And I think he also said Kanye. And I said, okay, I think when she had Kanye on, he was definitely saying some crazy stuff. I don't actually think he said the Holocaust didn't happen, but yeah, I could be wrong about that.
And his
So,
podcast bubble is very, very, very small. I mean, look
Yeah.
how far away we've moved from the goalpost here. If you're talking about podcast reach,
Right. And so I'm saying that it went from these people are all Holocaust deniers to at least one of them arguably had on a guest who is a Holocaust denier, but didn't say that on the interview in question. That's how far it was moved. And yet this guy's rolling his eyes at me like, oh, come on, Bob, you're nitpicking here. And I was like, whoa, you know.
yeah, that's pretty gross. And I mean, it feeds into our topic here today because he blocked you rather than, try and have a discussion. But as I was looking at what happened there, all I could picture in my mind was a bunch of chimpanzees sitting in a tree. We are not that far removed from our ancestors here, and we are constantly thinking about our status. And one way to elevate your status in the pack is to be an exceptional entity and have skills and provide contributions to others. And the other way is to demote everybody ostensibly underneath you, or try to drag people down by calling them Holocaust deniers or whatever. So
I bet you a chimp has never called another chimp a Holocaust denier. They'd be like, there's no such thing as zoos. What are you talking about?
If we spend enough time diagnosing decoding the sign language, but that's all this guy was doing. He wanted to elevate his status and lower others. And how do you do that? You call people a bunch of names.
And again, just so I understand why Alex thinks he's on the good side of history. You know what I mean? Like, there are clearly very anti-Semitic people posting daily on X without apparent repercussion. It's partly because, they have fake account,
and
you
none
can't tell
of
who
them
they are. Right.
are named Joe Rogan.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Or anybody else. And that's the thing is I did look because Nick Fuentes says, he's certainly a Holocaust minimizer. Like, he's openly joked about, the number being a lot lower and stuff like that. Right. So I get that. I didn't see him on that list. And then
he might have been arguing that it should be higher. He's not
right.
He's not very subtle.
Isn't that Roseanne Barr's line? I don't know if she made it, but saying like, isn't it weird that the people who deny the Holocaust are precisely the ones that wish it were true or something like that? And also I looked for Kanye and I didn't see him listed anywhere. So just for people to understand, it's not that I'm just reflexively, oh, come on, that can't possibly. No, I actually looked and I was like, nope. I do not see a single person on here, Alex, who denies the Holocaust, nor do I know of any one of them who had a guest who denied the Holocaust. So what are you talking about? And instead of him clarifying, well, what I meant was, but no, just block me because Bob keeps misrepresenting, which to me was even worse. Like, what do you mean? You didn't mean to say that they denied Holocaust? What did you mean by that then?
Yeah, parse that language like we learned how to do in third grade. Parse that sentence. All right, let's move on to money.
Oh, okay. So here, I don't have something to read from or what, but just to show people, and Adam and I were joking, we were texting back and forth about the conversation we're going to have. Let's pick some examples that aren't so radioactive. Otherwise, people might say, "Why do you guys always seem to talk about this?"
Well, trust us. This is the uncontroversial one we were thinking about.
No, yeah, right. What I'm saying now, yeah. I meant the other stuff was the one people,
Yeah.
That's all we did, right? So just every time I talk about MMT, modern monetary theory, I will predictably get, I'll retweet a Stephanie Kelton or something, or then even more so if I retweet some smaller MMT account because they, perfectly said something that's just been bothering me that is in the, the vibe of the MMT camp, but this guy finally just put it into words. And so I can retweet it and say, no, that's wrong because and I make my point. And then I will often get, I'll get a bunch of high fives or whatever, but also I will periodically get people telling me, Bob, what are you doing? Nobody takes these clowns seriously by you constantly engaging with them. You're giving them a platform. You're making it seem like they're more legitimate than they really are. And so why don't you just ignore them? Like, the other economists, like Jared Bernstein, where I'm just like, the MMT, okay, haha, we're the ones who are in positions of power and whatnot. And so they're just, again, with like, the creationist stuff and the intelligent design versus Darwinian evolution, standard account, or free trade and all that stuff, that I disagree with that as a strategy. I think I can see why the MMT camp is more popular now than it was 15 years ago. and I can, and Kelton is very glib and she gives a good presentation, and Warren Mosler is extremely glib and gives, good arguments and stuff on the fly. And so I decided that, no, I think this is a dangerous group that needs to be attacked with arguments. And if people just say, oh, money printer go burr, that's going to bounce off. The kind of people that are going to give the MMTers a chance are going to say, no, they say right at the beginning, we understand you can't just print your way to prosperity, that there's real constraints. What we're saying is, and then they go through a bunch of accounting that seems to be correct. And then, so I said, no, the answer to that is not just, oh, money printer go burr, you idiots. So why don't you go print some money? I don't think that's going to work. And so anyway, that's my take to them. So I think I'm being consistent here. And it's not just that I'm saying, hey, let's explore these questions that make some people uncomfortable when it comes to Zionism. No, in general, I think you should explore this stuff.
Yeah, and I'm very glad you do that. You're doing the Lord's work. It looks very annoying every time I see you going back and forth with one of these MMTers because, anyway, I'm glad you do that. Were there other examples you wanted to go through, or maybe some final closing bit of wisdom?
Well, also because it's a fun, I think, like another sort of silly example is like the moon landing stuff, right?
Yeah.
So even there, and I do have to confess that was spicy enough where I have had to be a bit humorous with that, because I understand if I just said, hey, I don't know if we landed on the moon, that sounds insane. And that, if, I have clients and whatever in the financial sector, and, I don't want that in my Wikipedia page that Murphy has publicly, you know what I'm saying? And also because it's not that that's my position. It's way more nuanced. It's my position really is I've gone and I've listened to like flat earthers. And after 2 minutes, I can be like, what the hell are you guys talking about? No, there's this, and this. This is crazy. Give me a break. Whereas I can listen to the people who don't think the moon landing happened, and I can say, yeah, they gave 10 arguments and 5 of them seem pretty plausible. Like, I don't know what the response is. The other 5, yeah, I can see why that's actually not a good argument. But those 5, I don't know. Maybe I could do some more research. Okay, yeah, that one. So now there's only 4 good arguments. But I'm saying it's for something that people think should just be like, oh, you idiot. I was surprised by when I got into it. Like, oh, yeah, okay, there are some issues here. So that's what my position is. But yet, like I said, because of this whole thing, like I've been very tepid with that and always encapsulated like jokey, because again, it's people get uncomfortable with stuff like that. It's like, oh, if you have that opinion on something, you must be an idiot. And I kind of want to maintain my distance from you because you must be insane.
Yeah, I want to use the moon landing controversy to point a mea culpa towards myself, because here I am on this episode, and I've done it on others, talking about other people's psychological problems and emotional problems and how they just don't act right, and if they'd only listen to me. But just a few episodes ago, you and I were talking about the moon landing issue, and you sort of cornered me, and I found myself extremely dismissive and not giving the argument, which I think was wrong. I wasn't giving it the due that I should give an argument presented in good faith. And so
are you being serious?
Yeah, I do it myself.
Oh, I mean, probably if I reviewed it, I'd be like, oh yeah, what the heck were you doing there? But I don't remember that. So
I backed down pretty quickly because you offered a little resistance, but it was about the guy who was saying before the Apollo 1 blew up that the thing was totally unsafe, and there's whistleblowers that won't come forward, something like that. I don't know. And the argument being that how could you get from there to actually getting astronauts on the moon in such a short time? And
yeah, okay, yeah, I kind of remember.
I was being very dismissive. I don't think that's correct, but I wasn't. I found myself in that spot with a history professor when I didn't actually have all the immediate refutations for every single point. So I just rolled my eyes and said, "Well, you're an idiot." I mean, not you, but
right.
It's very easy to do that, and it's a cheat. It's an easier way out, but it doesn't work.
Yeah, I don't know. So how do you feel? Do we have some closure? So I think there is. Okay, why don't we do this then? I have alluded to this before, on this podcast before. There was a time when I did play the card to myself of saying, I don't want to give this person a play. I don't want my presence and interaction to in any way elevate this person. And it was Chris Cantwell. And This was, again, I was supposed to host or moderate a debate between him and Jeff Tucker. And it was, I just decided I don't want that to be on YouTube. I don't want to be around. But again, it's not because, oh, he's a bad person. It's because he was trying to show how, hey, I started out like, your guys' views, and then now I just went and saw the truth. And to me, it was just, I didn't want to have that attached. Well, no, actually, I didn't like that, right? Whereas if some Marxist who was in favor of all white people being murdered wanted to debate me, I would consider it, if the person had a big platform and, that I would consider, you know what I'm saying? So I wouldn't just say, well, no, I don't want to make it look like these arguments deserve scrutiny. But whereas on this particular one, I just felt like because he's saying I am the true libertarian and I've just taken these views to I was like, no, I don't want to have to debate that. It made me feel icky. So that's why I didn't do that. And I think events later proved that, I made the right call.
Nice,
I don't regret that decision. So anyway, I can see both sides, and I'm not trying to lay down blanket rules, but another example, and Dave Smith often says, because he'll have people on, like he had Cantwell on even after the Charlottesville thing, and people were getting mad at Dave, and Dave was saying, what do you, I've had people email me and say that I talked them out of it. They were flirting with, this alt-right, go in that direction, and I pulled them back because I was willing to talk to some of their, icons and point out the flaws in their arguments. Whereas if you just don't talk about it, then they can build their audience because no one challenges them. So I get that. And his point was too, he would say, if I go on a panel on CNN and there's some guy from the CIA there talking about blowing up babies, nobody gets mad at me. Like, why would you be on a panel with a guy advocating baby killing?
Right.
That's just, it's a difference of foreign policy views. You know what I mean? So his point was, just because I talked to a self-proclaimed white nationalist or whatever the heck Chris called himself, why does that make me a bad person when you wouldn't apply that same argument anywhere else? It's just like there's particular views that are odious that you're not allowed to even interact with those people. And again, the whole point of what we're talking about here in Daryl's point, it's not obvious that even does a good thing to contain the growth of that ideology.
Yeah, I think I'll take a stab at providing a principle and a tentative strategy for handling this sort of thing. I think the principle is you should combat these ideas in general. And since obviously you can't take all comers, you have to decide to pick and choose. And I think the ones you wouldn't want to have on would be ones where you think they don't make a compelling argument for their side, or they argue in bad faith. Or maybe they're particularly noxious, like if they couldn't stop cursing and just saying horrible things, or maybe they're too irrelevant, just, some guy in the sewer, you don't pick him up to talk to.
Right.
So there's a few reasons why you might not use this particular person. So you'd say no, but the principle, I think, is that, don't make yourself a slave. It's not your job to refute every argument, but in general, I think these arguments should be refuted in public by people who are competent to do so. And that seems like a decent principle and a decent strategy.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, I know. I had another one. I couldn't read my own handwriting. Just real quickly. So a different example is Jeremy Kauffman on X recently tweeted out something about, some guy was complaining about how Americans do so poorly. I think it was Vivek actually was saying how Americans do terribly on standardized tests, math and science and whatever, compared to other countries. And hey, that's why we got to get rid of the Department of Education or do reform or whatever Vivek's standard spiel was. Stop watching Saved by the Bell. You get the idea. And Jeremy pushed back on and I've seen him make this point, in words before, but then he had this chart that I hadn't seen. And he said, no, actually, Americans outperform basically the whole world if you separate it out by race. Okay, so the claim is that like Koreans who live in the United States do better on math and science testing than the average student in Korea, and that Japanese blah, blah, blah. And that, Germans in the United States do better than the people in Germany. And that, and that's, and people from various African countries in the United States do better than people from that country. And that was his claim. And that just is the averages. And so this is the, the awkward part is to say, well, because we have large amounts of certain types of populations, that's what makes our average so low. But that's, that's not the U.S. is bad. It's just we have more of those people than other countries do, right? So that's his claim. And so I think a lot of people would just, whoa, and they wouldn't want to even address that. They would just block him or something and say, well, that's a racist thing to say. But I was curious, like, wait a minute, let me make sure. And so, because my immediate thought was, well, is this just an immigrant effect, right? That from these other countries, the people who tend to be in the United States,
the selection
Korea
bias
or whatever,
yeah.
are going to be, the people who immigrated from those countries. So wouldn't that tend to make them, and so
more earnest, more enterprising, richer, probably. Yeah.
So that was my first thought. And in fairness, I asked Jeremy, where's this study? Because I wanted to go read the method, that they used and whatnot. In the chart said this excludes first and second generation immigrants. Okay. So the author of this, assuming the numbers were right, apparently corrected that. But my point in this anecdote is just to say, for me, instead of just saying, oh no, that can't be right because, that would sound racist, is just like to not be afraid of it and just say, okay, well, let me just go see, what this is, because it's possible that the data don't actually mean the interpretation that he's giving to it.
Do you think there's a problem with a chart like that if it doesn't try to do something to disentangle poverty? Or do you think it doesn't matter?
To me, exactly. That's why I wanted to see the study. And it turned out, I don't think there was like a study. I think it was more like some guy running an account was using whatever OECD data or something, was compiling it. So I'm not saying he was wrong, but I'm just saying I wanted to, like you're saying, I wanted to see, did they run regressions and did they correct because that's the thing. If you're like a referee on a journal submission, that's the thing you do. Like they present, oh, we found this one variable has a lot of explanatory power. And then you sit there and brainstorm and like, well, could this be a correlation versus causation? Then you try to think up of 9 different variables that might be driving this.
That's the thing that's always missing. If I were a referee, I would throw all of them out because I'd find some variable they hadn't thought of, or
So to answer your question, Adam, yes, you would totally want to correct for that. And I don't know if, what that was, or if you did correct for that, would the effect still be? So I don't know. That was my point, that instead of just saying like, oh, I don't like the implications of that, so I'm just going to pretend I didn't see that tweet, I was curious about, because I did have this idea that, Americans are just dumb, and especially public schools, blah, blah, blah. And if it turned out that, oh, no, actually, that maybe it's not the case that the American educational system is as bad as I thought vis-a-vis the rest of the world. So anyway, it might possibly change the way I think of these things. And so, because then that made me realize, well, it's not like the rest of the world all has privatized, laissez-faire Rothbardian educational system. So why would I think that the U.S. was worse compared to the rest of the world? Why would I think that? I'd be just, as an American, you're so U.S.-centric, and as a libertarian, I can't stand government schools. So,
indeed. All right. Well, we're coming up upon an hour. Have you said your fill?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, we done proved it, ladies and gentlemen. You shouldn't, if you want to nip a bad argument in the bud, you can't do it in a clumsy or noxious or censorious manner. You gotta meet arguments with arguments. If you are listening on the Bob Murphy Show, please, I beg of you, come visit my YouTube channel where I have shows that don't have Bob Murphy in them. Go to at Heyman Nature, Haman, on YouTube, also on all your podcatchers at that name. And you can also catch my writing on my Substack, HeymanNature.substack.com. And if you're a fan of mine and listening on Heyman Nature and you haven't checked out the Bob Murphy Show, well, how shame on you. Go check it out, BobMurphyShow.com. Thank you, Bob. This was wonderful as always. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Adam, and thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.